Hello and welcome, or welcome back. We've heard about the Bundestrojaner, remote forensic software, in the previous talk, and we will now learn how terrorists use the internet. This talk will be rather shortly. It is about half of an hour, and it will then there will be a quarter of an hour of discussion because Marco has to leave early. So have fun.
Yeah, I have a second topic for you, how terrorists use the internet, cyber terrorism. When you're reading current legislation in the area of cybercrime, new instruments, new provisions to criminalize certain activities, you always find references that are linking this legislation to terrorism. So when you're reading them, and I'm reading them on a regular level, on a regular basis, you know there is a lot of terrorism going on in the internet. It must be an incredible number. So dangerous, so everything is so terrible what there is going on with regard to terrorism. I would like to give you an idea what is the basis where we can really discuss on, what are information that we really have about terrorism on the internet. And there are two difficulties I would like to point out. In the beginning, currently the term terrorism is used as a justification for stricter laws. This is especially happening in the period after the attacks in New York in 2001. For some period of time, let's say, well, at least 4 or 5 years, it was sufficient to mention the word terrorism to stop any kind of refusing legislation. Any politician who would stand up and say, listen, this might not be a good law, what is the justification? They would always say, listen, it's a fight against terrorism. Do you really want to support terrorism by refusing this legislation? That was for a period of time after the shock of the attacks, what completely sufficient. Terrorism anywhere, and you wouldn't need a justification. But terrorism is a word that is describing a phenomenon. It is neither a justification nor an explanation. It's just a term. It is describing a phenomenon. So in addition, if we need stricter laws, and I'm going to speak about the legal issue as well, if we need stricter laws, we have to explain why is that. And just mentioning its fight against terrorism is definitely not sufficient. And the difficulty is, I would point out one example, and I've mentioned this in the previous discussion, is very closely connected to the question of data retention. In Italy, there is a law, it's one of the laws that was implemented with regard to the fight against terrorism, that forces anybody who would like to offer internet services to the public, and that's not only the access provider, that's somebody who wants to run an internet cafe as well, it forces them to register first of all. They need to go through a registration process, and they need the authorization from a certain agency to be allowed to run the service. And then next step, they need to ask anybody who wants to use their services, a tourist from the United States who would like to drop into an internet cafe to check his email, they have to ask him for his identification and write down the identification to ensure that if this is a terrorist, they can trace back the route and they know who was acting. Because if you're using public internet services, well, you never know who was using them. So this is a law that was justified with a fight against terrorism. I don't know how many terrorists are based in Italy. I haven't heard about so many. I don't know how many terrorists are spending their holiday there just to check their emails, but this is a measure which is very difficult to explain. It's a very critical measure. It's a very difficult law. It was simply explained with the need to fight against terrorism. And the difficulty that I see is within this legislation there are no sufficient numbers mentioned. Nobody tells us how many terrorists do we have in the internet. There are just very few information that you can collect. Because what is happening, and as I'm working for international organizations, I'm running into senior lawmakers from time to time, and when you're speaking to them about terrorism, they always say, well, you know, there are cases, but I will never be able to tell you when they happened, how many of them. I can just tell you there are cases. So states are very much afraid of offering information about this because this could this could lead to difficulties. People could lose the trust in the government if they get the impression they are not able to fight against those attacks because they're happening on a regular basis. So we might not even know that terrorists are attacking critical infrastructure every day 20 times because nobody's telling us. And if nobody's reporting this, we're having a problem. So the FBI, for example, said with regard to cybercrime, please report them. If you don't report them, we don't know how big the problem is. So the same with regard to cyber terrorism. We have very few information. So from my point of view, if we want to have a scientific discussion, and I'm a scientist, we need a basis for that. We need sufficient information. And we cannot just say I have heard that somebody said that there was a report published once that says that there are terrorists on the internet. So that's definitely not sufficient. There is another problem when we're talking about terrorism, and that's the definition of terrorism. There are quite different national approaches in what is a terrorist. So I'm quite sure some of those people that are defined or categorized as terrorists in some countries wouldn't be terrorists from my point of view. There are a number of approaches to have an international standards in this matter. I have just pointed out one. And I would just like to, this is a much longer definition and it contains many more cases, but a terrorist under this definition is somebody who aims to seriously destabilize or destroy the fundamental political structure of a country. And how does he do it? For example, by attacks upon a person's life. So, as we're in Germany, there is one of the great heroes that we do have, von Stauffenberg, who tried to attack Hitler, the former Chancellor of Germany, with a bomb to stop him from continuing his leading role in the Second World War. Well, if we take it serious, the terrorist definition, well, he definitely aims to seriously destroy fundamental political structure. I can tell you, if Hitler would have been dead and removed, there would have been a great chance that the entire regime would break down by attacking a person's life. True, that's what he did. And he did it for political reasons. So if we have a more narrow definition and say it must be political reasons, again, von Stauffenberg would have been a terrorist. But he is not a terrorist. It's a question of the point of view. For the Nazi regime, he was a terrorist. For us today, he's not a terrorist, he is a hero. So I think this is a good example to point out how flexible the definition is and how difficult it is to categorize it right. So when we're talking about terrorism and the fight against terrorism, we always think about, well, the people that are coming from the Arabic countries. But actually, take Northern Ireland. 50% of the society was supporting, in one or the other way, terrorist organizations, terrorist groups there. We have same phenomenon in Spain. Terrorist group active there as well. We had them in Germany. So it's not only the Arabic countries, there are many other countries, and the idea who is a terrorist are completely different. When we're talking about Chechnya, well, the Russians say these are terrorists. When we're talking about Guantanamo, the US says these are terrorists. So it's very difficult just, to come together and have one definition of terrorism. So when we're talking about cyber terrorism, well, I might have a completely different understanding than people in some other place in the world. And as I mentioned before, very difficult. There are just very few information published about those kind of attacks. So when I will try, or in my approach to try to explain to you how big or small the problem is, it is very difficult to refer to sufficient numbers. In the past, especially in the 80s and 90s, the discussion about terrorist attacks were very much concentrating on some ideas how terrorists could attack critical infrastructure. Well, they could hack into a nuclear power plant, and they could run down the power plant, or maybe explode, or whatever. They could run down the entire electricity supply of part of a state, or the entire state. So, of course, after the crash of the electricity system in the United States, there were rumors that said these were hackers who hacked into the system and simply made it run down. But, possible targets were electricity supply, traffic control, emergency in general. So there was a lot of discussion going on in this area, and they said this is what the terrorists would do. They would attack us. They would attack our infrastructure by using computer technology. And there is a good reason for this discussion, because our information technology is vulnerable. As we can see when we see how many successful virus attacks there are, we can see, yeah, it is possible to attack computer systems, critical infrastructure. When you think about Zasser, the worm designed by a student living not far away from here, well, he proved that it is possible to stop major airlines from operating their flights because the check-in doesn't work anymore. So saying, no, it's not possible, is not true. It is possible. So we can think about a lot of scenarios where they could attack our critical infrastructure. But we have to say these cases are rare. I mean, I cannot even give you any sufficient information about cases that happened. I mean, maybe you have some information. I would be more than happy to hear that. Because people say, yes, there are those cases, but we cannot speak about them. But the fact that this discussion was so long concentrating on this aspect was very much taking away the focus from other aspects, other areas where these terrorists are already working in. And I've tried to put together a few of those areas where terrorists are using the internet and where they are really making use of it in a very powerful way. And I would just like to get through this. Just giving you some background information, there was an Al-Qaeda training manual that was found in Manchester. And the translation says something like, using public sources openly and without resorting to illegal means no circumventing of protection measures. It is possible to gather at least 80% of all information required about an enemy. This is especially referred to the internet. I can find so many information there, so the terrorists are aware of the fact that the internet is a very powerful tool. Well, I'm going to make this rather short. We could have a long philosophical discussion about close links between the structure of the internet and the structure of terrorist organizations. One of the points we can point out there is both are following a decentralized concept. The intranet is based on a decentralized architecture. The terrorist organizations, the successful terrorist organizations that we have today, are based on the same structure. So you can hardly control the internet. It is very difficult to control terrorist organizations, even from the inside. But even if, for example, you try to get a terrorist organization out of the country, like we did in Afghanistan, they can rebuild their structure in a very quick way somewhere at a different location. So when we talk about Al-Qaeda, that was in Afghanistan before, they can of course operate their websites and use their email services from another country as well. They don't need to be located in exactly the same country. So there is a lot of flexibility, and the same flexibility the internet offers, the terrorist organizations need. So I would just like to give you some ideas where the terrorists are already using the internet. I would just like to give you one example. I was growing up in a town not far away from one of these NATO air bases where they have these planes with a big radar screen on the top. Top secret. So I mean, everybody in this area knew that there was an airfield because planes were landing and starting and you could see them. But in all maps that you were able to buy, this was not marked as an airfield. Secret information, the enemy shouldn't get aware of this. And still in many maps you can buy from this area, you don't find the airfield. But when you go to the internet and use a service like this one where you can see the satellite pictures, you can not only see that there is an airfield, you can see even how many planes there are standing there. So I mean, this is something the terrorists are using. What sense does it make to restrict information in a regular map you can buy if you get more information in the internet? And it's not only that these search engines are offering you the possibility to find secret information. It's about the same when we're talking about information that were by accident offered in the internet. There was a case in the United States where they put some information how to build a nuclear bomb on a website by accident. They didn't want to do it. But scientists called them and said, listen, this information that you have just placed on your website that should prove that Iraq was building a bomb can be used by terrorists to build a bomb, so you should better remove them. So it's very easy to find those information, and these information are used. There were British troops in Afghanistan who got aware of the fact that there were really very, very well and very precise missile hits in their main camp, and they didn't know why these attacks can be so precise until they found out that information from Google Earth or any other satellite picture operator were used to control these attacks. And I mean, it's not only using those services. If you want to know how to build a bomb, it is much easier today to find this information on the internet. In the past, you might have found them if you know the right people, if you know the right library, but today you can find this information easily in the internet. So that's one of the use. I mean, terrorists are of course using that. It's We know some cases where we have information that they did use it, and it's quite likely that more of them will use this because we use the services, so why shouldn't they? Another thing is they use websites. In 1989, only very few terrorist organizations had websites. Today, all of them have websites. They use them for various reasons. They have a lot of advantages. Everybody can access them. Normally, when you publish information, print out, you will only publish it in the region. It's very expensive. And if you're based in, for example, Northern Ireland, people who might be interested in supporting your fight wouldn't be able to access the information. The internet is much easier. You can publish everything for very low costs. And it's not only used for that. Media is very interested in websites. If you follow reports about terrorism, you find very often quotation from websites, you see pictures, and they of course use these websites to distribute videos like this one, propaganda material. So there's a close relation between media on the one hand side and terrorist information and disinformation on the other side. Media is interested in websites, terrorists realize this and are publishing information on websites. Another issue, what we're doing via the internet is recruitment. I mean, there are many people who are interested in supporting terrorist organizations for various reasons, and these websites are used to get in contact with these people. And they're very clever. It's not just like a contact information where you say, okay, I can leave a message, please contact me and send me some material about you. If you access this website, they will try to identify who you are and try to get in contact with you. And if you come back, they will try to find out how he's coming the second time. This is a potential candidate for us. So they have developed a number of mechanisms that e-business companies are using as well to try to get in closer contact with potential customers. For them, it is potential members. And they use it for communication. I mean, I don't know if there is anybody in this room who is not using email services. I would wonder if there are any terrorists that are not using email services if they are available. The advantage is you can get them everywhere. There is very little regulation on the use of emails. You can get them without a registration process, a sufficient registration process. You can use nicknames and whatever, and you can get access wherever you are. I mean, there is about no place in the world, even in an African country, you find many places where you can access emails. So it's wonderful. If you travel a lot to the destinations where you want to place your bombs, easy to get access to the information there. And that's not everything. I mean, emails can be encrypted. So this is another possibility for you to get additional security for the communication among the members of the groups. And encryption is one big difficulty when it comes to terrorist communication, because there are just very few reports about this issue, but this is something because the use of encryption technology is becoming so easy and so powerful that there are great fears that this technology could be used in a way that law enforcement agencies, even if they have information that there is an attack being planned, don't have access to the information. So that will be a topic that will follow us. That's just a suggestion. I was pretty good with suggestions in the last Chaos Communication Congress. Congresses where I gave speeches. My suggestion is, or my fear is, that this will be a topic that will be discussed next year and the coming years. Encryption technology, how states should deal with encryption technology, and especially it comes down to restricting encryption technology, because I'm not a technician again, but it's very interesting to see how powerful encryption is and how little the possibilities of those people who want to break the encryption by the classic brute force attack is how little the chances are to break the encryption. So unless there are no means to circumvent the protection, for example, social engineering, I mean, it's not only done by criminals, can be done by law enforcement as well. As long as they don't have this possibility, there's a great fear that we will have a restriction in this area anyway to restrict encryption technology, because terrorists, if they use it, they have a great potential of causing difficulties with regard to investigation. Yeah, terrorist financing is another issue. What you can do is, terrorists need money. Just very few of them have sufficient money, so they are not depending on donations. Many of them are depending on donations. So a number of terrorist organizations are leaving information on their website how you can donate money. And the interest of the terrorist organization is to make it as easy as possible and as safe as possible for the people who are donating. Because if you're making a donation of €50 and the police is standing in front of your door the next day and says knock knock, you just supported a terrorist organization, we're going to take you in prison, you won't be able to make another donation. So for pure egoistic reasons, they are very interested in protecting you. So they are trying to install systems to make it as easy as possible for you. You can, for example, send the money via Western Union. You can use prepaid credit cards. You can use e-gold, any virtual currency. And one very clever way, from my point of view, is what they can do is they set up fake shops. You have a shop with high price goods. For example, a leather bag for $5,000 US. So it looks like a regular shop, it's a regular company, but it's a company that is owned by a terrorist organization. So if you buy something there, it looks like a regular transaction. You simply transfer money for something you got. But either you don't get the good, so it's a pure donation, 5,000 euro for nothing, or you get something which is not worth 5,000 euro. So how do they ensure that law enforcement agencies don't get, they would recognize that there is something going wrong if they are trying to order something and don't get anything. So how do they ensure that law enforcement agencies do not get aware of this? Well, if they complain and said we didn't get our bag, they are sending out one bag. So those ones who want to donate will never ask for a bag, and those ones who say, why is my bag not here, they will get a bag. But this is very difficult for law enforcement agencies to trace this back. And the last point, and I would like to make this rather short, is they're using the internet for money laundering purposes. And I will not get in detail here, but I would just like to point out that it is rather easy to use the internet for money laundering purposes. I don't want to give you instructions here, but what I'm telling you here is something you can find everywhere on the internet, like plans to build a bomb, so I'm not telling you any secrets. Just very briefly, if you're a criminal up here and you have some 50,000 US dollar, and we're talking about small amounts, it doesn't work if you have 40 million. If there's anybody here who has a problem with 40 million on his account, go out, it's not for you. So if you have 50,000, and that's the amount we're talking about for terrorist organization, it's cheap. A tax like the one in the United States, it's rather cheap. You would be surprised. So they only need rather small amounts. So what they're doing is, first of all, they transfer the money, split it into 2 or 3 parts and transfer it via Western Union to an online casino. We have hundreds of online casinos. You simply choose a nickname, a password, you're a member of an online casino. They are asking you to transfer the money so you can play a game of chance. And you transfer $50,000, but you only play with $1. You lose, like most of the cases. So now you say to the online casino, dear online casino, I'm not interested in using your services anymore, give me back my money. So they ask you, how do you want it back? Western Union, do you want it on your credit card? You say, no, I would like to have it on my e-gold account. So you quickly open an e-gold account and it's not here, the spot is not here. By accident, most of the e-gold accounts, most of the virtual currencies are run in Arabic countries. So, or a number of them. So what the next step is, you get a transfer from the casino that says, lucky winner, here are your $49,000. So you can, at this time it is already difficult for the law enforcement agencies to prove that you didn't win the money in the casino, but you've transferred all the money. So next thing is you buy something at eBay. There are some lists of goods that you can buy and sell for the same price. You cannot make any profit, but you don't lose anything. And these lists only have one idea. The idea is that you can use it for money laundering purposes. So you buy something like a TV set, which doesn't lose its value. With your 49,000, you buy 10 of them and you sell them again, and then you ask eBay. eBay is asking you, or the customer is asking you, where do you want the money? You say, not on my account, please on PayPal. And then you could continue this. And let's leave out eBay, because eBay is always taking some time with regard to the duration of the auction. Everything else can be done within half an hour. Believe me, if you split it around the world, law enforcement agencies will need years to trace this back. So, of course, terrorists can use this to launder the money they have. Okay, the conclusion. Terrorists use the internet. Well, it would be surprising if they wouldn't do it. The extent and the intensity, even if we take the information that are not based on sufficient numbers, the intent is less than what we have with regard to the other cyber crimes. There are many more other crimes. We know, for example, that there are information or there are advices that terrorist groups, if they're running out of money, they should set up child porn website where they sell child pornography, because you can make rather a lot of money in a rather short period of time by selling child pornography. So of course they're committing computer crimes like dissemination of child pornography. But especially those cases that we're afraid of, hacking attacks, dissemination of viruses, that's something which is just, if it is happening, if these information are right, it's just happening in a very small amount of cases, so we don't really have to be afraid of those terrorists that are overrunning us with cybercrime. And of course they're using the other technology, and we have many websites, but we have many more websites with different other illegal content than those websites with illegal propaganda from terrorist organizations. So when we're talking about special legislation for terrorists, I have to say why. Why do we need something special? Those crimes that the terrorists are carrying out are the same crimes any other criminals doing. Criminals who want to commit the crime, hacking or whatever, they're using the same technology to communicate, and they use the same technology to commit the crimes. People who want to launder money are using the same technology. We don't, from my point of view, there is very little justification for special laws with regard to terrorism, because one of the things we discussed in the previous session was, in many cases, these laws that are installed just for a special target group are later on, especially if they're successful, open for other target groups. So if we now implement special regulations with regard to terrorism, it is very likely that others will say, okay, we need it for child pornography as well. We need it for hacking, for copyright violations. So in this moment we have powerful instruments, but we're using them for a completely different target group without questioning again the justification. So from my point of view, and I'm very happy, I'm very interested to hear your point of view, it is very questionable if we really need different laws to address terrorism in the internet. I think it's a phenomenon of cybercrime, but it's nothing which is so dangerous, which is so special, that this would require new laws. I would like to thank you for your attention. If there are any questions related to this presentation, I'm more than happy to assist you and try to answer your questions. And I'm of course more than willing to try to answer your questions that you have here right now.
We have about a quarter of an hour for questioning before Marco has to leave. Any questions?
You've talked about the use of the internet by terrorists for actually operating their organization, for recruitment, fundraising and the like. What do you think are the risks of terrorists using the internet as a weapon, as for attacking a country's internet infrastructure?
Well, take Estonia. I think there's a presentation about this conflict between Russia and Estonia about the potential attacks against critical infrastructure, government servers. I think there is a potential. We see that these attacks are possible. But the question is, are terrorist organizations able to carry out those kind of attacks? And with regard to this, I would just like to refer to a quotation. It's not as current as I would like it to be, but let me just check it. In December 2005, so it's just a rather short period of time ago, the Associated Press cited US FBI Assistant Director stating that Al-Qaeda, and this is one of the top organizations when it comes to the use of information technology. We have to say the fact why we are reporting so often about Al-Qaeda in this context is the fact they're using the technology much better than our terrorist organizations that we do have here in Europe, that they are not capable at the moment of mounting cyber attacks that could damage US critical infrastructure. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't be able that they wouldn't be able to attack smaller countries and their infrastructure. But from my point of view, if Al-Qaeda would be able to carry out those attacks, they would do it. But we don't see those kind of attacks. So I think we have a great difficulty, a great problem when it comes to information technology and security. I see that we base our entire system, something we're heavily depending on a very vulnerable technology. So I would say we have to be really aware of the fact that it can happen all the time. I mean, the internet was never designed to resist against attacks from the inside. So if we have terrorists in the inside, it can of course happen that they attack our infrastructure. And we're using an operating system, or I mean not we, but 95% of the population is using an operating system which has weak points. And I mean, these weak points are used by designers of viruses. Why shouldn't it be used by clever terrorists? But I have to say, I think that those people who are designing the viruses are still way ahead of the terrorist organizations, and they're way ahead of the law enforcement agencies when it comes to this remote forensic tool. So I think I'm not really afraid at the moment, from my point of view, from my knowledge, that the law enforcement agencies will be able to break into my computer without me realizing it by doing it via the internet, and I don't think the terrorists will be able to carry out a big attack against critical infrastructure in most countries. But we have to take it serious, and I think this is something which is happening at the moment. And I mean, let them just take terrorism as a justification. Let them start this discussion about attacks against critical infrastructure with a terrorism. Maybe within this discussion we come to the point that we speak about cybersecurity in general, not only related to terrorism, but that we say, okay, how can it be that we're basing our entire infrastructure, our daily use of communication services on technology which is so weak as we're doing at the moment? Why is there no plan B? Why is there a government that is relying on these services as well, but not able to control it or support the users in protecting themselves? So I think there are many questions related to cybersecurity that need to be discussed. If it is done within the context of terrorism, okay, good. But currently I don't see a great threat, so I wouldn't ask for any additional legislation in this area because it's simply not necessary. We have laws that criminalize attacking computer systems. So these are completely sufficient for cyber criminals. Let them come, let them start to attack, and if we're realizing we're not able to deal with this, then we can think about new laws, but we shouldn't think about new laws before the crimes have even happened.
How could anyone think that the laws could stop the terrorists when obviously they don't care about the laws anyways?
Sorry, I can...
Why would laws prevent them from doing it when, if you're willing to go out and kill someone, you're hardly going to care of breaking into a system? I mean, does not seem... I don't see how law would ever fix the problem. Like, just with regards to that.
Good point, although I have to say, still, I didn't get the entire question. But if I got your question wrong, and please correct me, and please correct me if I got wrong, the question was, why do we need specific law for terrorism? And breaking into a system, why do we not refer to the laws we do have? Well, there are some people who say it's an emotional thing. How do politicians work? If there is something happening, if there is a discussion going on, they have to prove that they are really in control of a situation. So if everybody's reporting about terrorism and terrorism in the internet, they have to prove we do something. So they say what we need is what we can do as a lawmaker. We can implement a new legislation in this matter, even though it is not necessary. So we see the same phenomenon in a number of other situations. It's not only with regard to terrorism, but this is a very common way. And as a criminal law teacher, I can only say we have sufficient provisions. We don't need a provision that says theft of cars is illegal. Then the next one, theft of bicycles is illegal. Next one, theft of trains is illegal. We can simply say theft is illegal. So we have the right provisions. We have a provision in the German criminal code as well as the criminal code of the other European countries, because they have all just implemented the new the EU framework decision on attacks against computer systems. They all have sufficient laws that are able them to fight against attacks against computer system. So there is no need for a special regulation for other regulations, but nevertheless some countries say we especially criminalize attacks from terrorists against critical infrastructure with a higher sentence. So the only reason why some countries might do it is the fact that they would like to have a higher penalty. So that would be the only reason, from my point of view, why we should specially criminalize acts related to terrorism.
Any more questions? We still have some time.
Why wouldn't like Bin Laden, he got a lot of money? Why wouldn't he rent a botnet or something?
Why would Iran?
Like Bin Laden, he got a lot of money saved somewhere. Why wouldn't he rent a botnet and start his own war?
That's a good question. Well, let's put it this way. I will try to put it on a general level. There is, when it comes to the fight against terrorism, is just a very specific problem. It's just one small problem. When we have a lot of other problems. We have piracy, for example, which is a big problem. For example, in China, I'm teaching in China at university. So when I go there, the first time I went there, I said I'm going to take a few DVDs with me. I'm going to go to the shop now and buy some DVDs. And my brother, who's been in China before, said, "Don't do that. Buy them there. You get the same DVDs there for 50 cents." This is a problem. Why should China address this problem? Why should they fight against this problem? Well, it's international pressure. And we have a number of countries, especially in the Arabic country, that feel a lot of pressure on them in the area of fight against terrorism, because a number of terrorists were coming from their country. I think there was more pressure on those countries where these terrorists were born than on the country where most of those terrorists from the September 11 attacks were based, which was Germany. I think there should be much more pressure in Germany. The question is, why were they all based in Germany? I think there are good reasons, positive reasons, because this is a very liberal country. It's chosen as well by terrorists as well as regular people because they like to stay here. This is something what we shouldn't stop. We shouldn't fight against this. But with regard to those countries that are actually under pressure and are currently really implementing very strong legislations, I'm sometimes really afraid when I read these laws, when I get the draft laws, to analyze them and to write a report, and I see what they implement in their countries. I'm really getting afraid because everything is prohibited. It starts with something like virtual sex is prohibited. When we're talking about illegal content, that means exchanging messages in chat system by saying, "Hey, I love you, take off your clothes." This is already a crime. And the same is happening as over-criminalization when it comes to cybercrime. The same is happening with regard to terrorism. There are a lot of things criminalized in those countries because of the international pressure on them to have adequate laws, or what international I wouldn't even say organizations, but especially the United States government, what they think are adequate laws is really putting them under pressure and makes them implement provisions that I hope will in the future be seen with a completely different perspective, and they might realize, okay, this is something what we simply have to take out of our criminal code again, because these provisions simply don't make any sense. I have to apologize if I'm missing part of the answers, but I think it is already difficult for you to understand me. But for me, without really hearing what you're saying, it's pretty difficult to just guess what you're saying. But if I didn't answer any of those questions, please feel free to send me an email. I would be more than happy to discuss it. Same if you hear anything about this. If you're hearing about anything about successful attacks from terrorists, I would be more than happy just to get information from you, because they're required for my scientific work. So currently, I'm swimming like in the water, not knowing where to go, because those information that are available are so poor. Okay, if there are no more questions, I would like to apologize for stopping the discussion here and run to catch my plane. It was a great pleasure again being here, and I hope to see as many people as possible again when the Chaos Communication Congress is going to take place the next time, or the camp. Thank you very much. It was great being here.